Good evening, everybody. It is 6 o'clock p.m. on the 18th of August, 2022. I am Mike Capuano. I'm the chairman of the planning board. With me tonight is Erin Gino, Jahan Habib, and Debbie Howard Easton. And pursuant to Chapter 107 of the Acts of 2022, this meeting of the planning board will be conducted via remote participation. The recording of these proceedings can be accessed at any time using the registration link of our agenda. This meeting is being recorded. We have a number of items on our agenda that we will be both continuing and also be hearing. But on our agenda tonight is one meeting's worth of minutes. 16 and 20 Medford Street, which has previously been opened and had been heard. 50 Webster Avenue has 3 different applications which will need to be read into the record. They have also requested a continuance on those 3. 231 to 249 Elm Street and 68 and 12 Grove Street has previously been opened, has previously been heard. On that, we will take that up again this evening. 59 Bow Street needs to be opened. That applicant has also requested a continuance. 384 McGrath Highway needs to be opened, and we will hear that this evening, as will 325 to 375 Assembly Road. That will need to be opened. We'll take testimony on that. So what I would like to do is my little cheat sheet. I believe I would like to address the minutes from the May meeting. Is everybody there? Yes, Debbie.
Mr. Chair, before we get started, and I forget, I just want to put it on the record that while I was out for the August 4th and June 16th planning board meetings, I did listen to the full recordings, and I've provided affidavit of certification that I did listen to those, so I'm available to fully participate and vote in this meeting.
Debbie, thanks. And I think we do require that affidavit to be filed with the clerk and the law department. Have you had a chance to do that?
I did provide it to Raisa.
Okay.
But so if there's something else I need to do, just let me know.
I would just ask that Raisa forward that affidavit to the appropriate folks to reflect the fact that Debbie is able to participate in this evening's meeting. Jahan's hand is also raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to mention, as we take votes on the approval of the May 4th meeting minutes, or I believe, I'm sorry, I think it might have been May 5th. I was not present for that meeting. I have heard the proceedings recorded. However, I have not submitted the affidavit, which may impact my ability to vote. I leave that to your discretion as well as Rice's.
So, Jahan, I can address that. It is an issue that has faced the planning board before. It has been the opinion of our council that if you were not present at a meeting and the issue is the adoption of the minutes, that if you believe reasonably that the minutes reflect what has occurred in that meeting to the best of your knowledge, that you do have a capacity to vote on it without having to file an affidavit. That came into play when we had a bunch of meeting minutes that needed to be adopted by a majority of board members that were not actually on the planning board at the time. So I had asked as chairman for an opinion by our solicitor's office on the ability of planning board members to vote on meetings that they were not only not in attendance for, but also not on the board for. So based on the guidance that was provided to us by council, I don't think you need to provide an affidavit. I think you're capable of being able to vote on those minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the confirmation.
Okay. So if everybody has had the opportunity to review the May 5th meeting minutes, does anybody have any comments, questions, or amendments to the minutes that were presented that you'd like to address? Seeing none, the chair moves to adopt the May 5th meeting minutes, seconded by Debbie. Chair votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Aaron votes aye.
Debbie votes aye.
We have meeting minutes. Next up, 59 Bow Street. Actually, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the clerk of the planning board to read into the record the notice of all the public hearings that need to be opened, and then we can move forward appropriately.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Reading into the record 5 items, starting with 50 Webster P&Z 21-060. US Union Square D3.1 owner LLC seeks to develop a 9-story LEED Platinum lab building in the HR zoning district, which requires site plan approval. 50 Webster Avenue P&Z 22-073 US Union Square D3.1 owner LLC seeks to develop a thoroughfare in the HR zoning district, which requires site plan approval. And also 50 Webster Avenue, 62 Prospect Street, P&Z 21-166, US Union Square D3.1 owner LLC seeks to develop a central plaza civic space type in the HR zoning district, which requires site plan approval. Also 394 McGrath Highway, P&Z 21-122. Contempo Builders proposes to develop a 4-story net zero ready apartment building and establish a household living principal use for 15 dwelling units in the mid-rise 4 zoning district. This proposal requires site plan approval and 1 special permit. Finally, 325 to 375 Assembly Row, P&Z 20-014, Street Retail LLC on behalf of Federal Realty OPLP proposes a revision to a previously issued special permit with site plan approval. Reference number for that is PB 2016-14 in the Assembly Square Mixed Use District to change the permitted design of ASQ Linear Park. And that is the finale.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. With that, we have a request to continue 59 Bow Street. The chair moves to continue that agenda item to the September 8th meeting. Seconded by Jahan. The chair votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Aaron votes aye.
Debbie votes aye.
That item is continued to September 8th. We also have, and Raisa, please confirm for us, requests by the applicant at 50 Webster Avenue for continuances for the 3 agenda items that are before us this evening. Is that right?
This is Raisa speaking. Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Okay. I do need to make 3 motions to continue those, so I'll do that now. The chair moves to continue 50 Webster Avenue. I only get the actual docket number there. 50 Webster Avenue, P&Z 21-060 for the building to the meeting on September 8th, seconded by Aaron. Chair votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Aaron votes aye.
Debbie votes aye.
That agenda item is continued. The next item on the agenda is 50 Webster Avenue, P&Z number 22-073, which is thoroughfare. The chair moved to continue that agenda item to the 8th of September. seconded by Debbie. Chair votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Aaron votes aye.
Debbie votes aye.
That agenda item is continued. The next is 50 Webster Avenue, P&Z number 21-166, which is the civic space. Chair moves to continue that agenda item to the 8th of September, and Jahan seconds that motion. Chair votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Aaron votes aye.
Debbie votes aye.
Wonderful. That agenda item is continued. What I would like to do now is invite the applicant at 16 and 20 Medford Street to please be unmuted and to have their shares screened as appropriate. They have an update for the rear facade of their building, which was something that the planning board requested of them. And the planning board would welcome a presentation of the amendment.
This is Raisa speaking. I do see a hand raised for Nick Zazzola. I will unmute you so you can tell us who the presenter for your for tonight will be.
Yes, thank you, Raisa. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Attorney Nick Zazula, McDermott, Quilty, and Miller, on behalf of the applicant, Somerville Living LLC. Raisa, if you could, it would be Tanya Carrera from Calsa Design Inc., I believe, and then Hugo DiBiase from the proponent.
This is Raisa speaking. I have unmuted Paul DiBiase and Tanya has been made into a presenter.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair,
We had a beautiful picture of a dog.
we downgraded, didn't we?
Showing the wrong screen still?
No, we
No.
can see.
No, we only have a building now, but if you could add the dog, I'd appreciate it.
We
Sorry.
should have put the dog in the rendering, Tanya. It would have been better. It would have been approved at the first hearing, is what I'm hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, Nick Zazula, McDermott, Quilty, Miller, Tanya Carrera from Calsa Design Inc. And we also have from Somerville Living LLC, Paul DiBiase and Hugo DiBiase. Just briefly, Mr. Chair, as you mentioned on the August 4th hearing, we did have feedback about two actual points. I think there was some questions and some comments about more distinction in the back of the building. We think we've accomplished that. We're very happy to show you that tonight. There were also, I think, a question from board member Gino, I believe, who had asked about burying power lines. So we have a brief slide on that to just answer that and make sure that the record shows that we have looked into that. And we're happy to go over those details as well. Those were the two main points I recall from the August 4th, but if we missed something, again, we're happy to address those as well. But that's what the presentation will show. So Tanya, if you want to go ahead and start again and jump right in, please take the mic. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Nick. Hi, everyone. Tanya Carrera from Calsa Design. So I'll just jump right into it. Just a reminder of the project team, which you're all pretty familiar at this time. DiBiase Homes as the owner, Nick Zazula from MQM as the legal counsel, and Calsa Design as the architect. We also have GM2 as the traffic civil, and Verdant as the landscape architect. And our development timeline, we were here just 2 weeks ago for our second planning board meeting. And prior to that, we went through the whole process with the UDC and neighborhood meetings for a little over a year now. And a quick recap of our site. So we are at the site indicated here at the corner of Medford and South Street. We also front on Bedford and Warren Street. Medford was our pedestrian street where we've located our commercial, and the remainder of the project would be 41 residential units. And our proposed aerial view, so you can kind of see before and after, massing of our building. And what we heard last time is you wanted to see kind of enhancement of the rear facade design, because there is some visibility from Warren and Bedford And we've provided some additional views, which can really give a picture of how much you'll see, along with enhancing the detailing on the facade. So here was our previous rendition of the rear facade. We had kind of more of a simple look with just gray panels with some balconies in between for the entire length. And our proposal today, which we revised, is showing the treatment that we used on the Medford and Warren Street side, which had the white paneling bays carried around for that entire side of the rear till you get to kind of the pinch point. And with that, we believe it is a more cohesive look to the building. We've also changed the window pattern to give more interest to that facade versus just having a bunch of double windows. We've spaced them, given some trim work around them. We've incorporated some additional cedar siding areas to warm up the space. And we've shown the trees a bit taller, which the landscape architect pointed out at the last meeting. They will get even much taller than we show here. So this is kind of a mid-life height. And in the middle here, you can see we've added the massing of the buildings behind it. So you can see how much would be visible if you were looking straight on from that view. This slide shows our revised rendering. The top view hasn't changed. That's the corner of Medford and Warren, but we've added these two additional views to give some context. So this top right one would be if you're on Warren looking towards Medford Street. So there's a two-story existing house here. You'd see the top floor. You wouldn't see as much down this corridor as you will see the other way due to the proximity, but you would have some visibility at the top here. And you can see the different materials peeking out. And from Bedford Street, we did the same thing. So the same treatment would be carried around that side. You can see in these bottom two views are perspective views of what you'll see. The adjacent house is a 2.5 story, and there is a double wide driveway, so you will see a good portion of that facade. We have, just like I said, carried the same treatment from the front around to that side and broken up with further cedar siding. And just the line work drawings showing the before, which is the panels and different window spacings. That was got a little bit, plain for the back. And then we've dressed it up with, especially this bottom one, you can see where we carried the Medford Street treatment around with the white panels, the balconies, and then spacing the windows differently as well. And with that, I will turn it back to Nick to talk about the wires, and then I can be available for any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. Mr. Chair, again, through you to Board Member Gino, we did recall your comment at the end of the hearing back on August 4th, and we have looked into this quite a bit. So this is a pretty a lot of language here, but it's just meant to show that we have looked into this to a good extent, such that we've had discussions not only with Eversource but also with the city's director of engineering. And what and the third point I will make, as you can see here on the bullets without reading them, that we did also have entered into a development covenant with the city's economic development department through OSPCD. And basically the gist of all those discussions that we've had over the past months of this project going back, to last year, was that burying the overhead wires along the street frontage here was infeasible for a few different reasons, mainly cost, with all of the all of the things that would need to be done. It was estimated at a couple of $1 million for the block of wires. And we also, again, had a discussion with the director of engineering, who basically said, we don't really have any experience with this amount of burying overhead lines. And we then followed up with that with Eversource. And this would all, the Eversource basically told us as well that, burying power lines is one thing, but you also have to consider telecommunications lines have to be buried in separate duct banks, which would double or triple the cost because you're doing that as well. And then there's also the issue about access, right? All the other properties that these wires run along we would have to deal with easements, right of entry for the work and things of that nature. So basically, the project as it is now was designed around the existing overhead wires that are not located on our property, that are in the public way. We will bury the lines that are that will be servicing our building. But the sum of all of this on the screen right now, again, not to put too much words on, but just to show you that we have actually given this a good amount of thought and looked into this. And if it was something that was brought up by the neighborhood, something that was brought up with the discussions with Councilor J.T. Scott, who's our city council, our councilor here. And at the end of the day, it just is not something that we're able to do for, feasibility, not only economically, but also, from a time perspective and also just a coordination perspective. So again, happy to go over this in more detail and answer any more specific questions, but again, wanted to make sure we address the question because it did come up throughout the process. We did look into it extensively, having discussions with the city and Eversource. So again, happy to answer any more questions you had on that, but wanted to make sure we communicated that information. Tanya, I think that's it. I don't think we have anything else. Again, we wanted to hit those 2 points. I know, those were the 2 main points, but we're happy to go into more detail about any of those or any other questions that you may have. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to reserve my comments until I hear from my colleagues. So this is not new information as it pertains to reopening public testimony. So we won't be reopening public testimony, but we will continue the discussion between the planning board and the applicant and staff. So I would appreciate any my colleagues have. I have a few, but I would like to try to hear what folks say when my concerns were not absolutely critical to the building, but I do respect the fact that you have made steps to address the concerns that I raised that were aesthetic. Yes, Aaron, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to actually respond to the power line bit, which is to say I really appreciate the applicant's diligence at looking into that and studying that feasibility. I think, that really just trying to make it happen to the best of your ability is appreciated. I also appreciate that the utilities for this particular building will be buried. And then should, some condition in the future change where the right of way and easements and sort of all of those externalities that are sort of in more city control or Eversource control, should those change, it doesn't limit the feasibility of burying power lines in more densely occupied areas. So I appreciate the detail and appreciate the challenges here. So thank you for looking into it, and thank you for reporting back to us on what you've done there. So I don't really have any concerns there, but I appreciate the applicant's efforts.
Thank you, Aaron. Do either of my other colleagues have any questions, comments before I make mine? Seeing none, I will say I do think that the rendering that you provided, and if you can go back to that slide that showed who you were, where you propose to be now, I appreciate that. Yep. The concerns that were raised by this board and by me was that the original design really, I don't think respected the rear of the building, particularly because we had people that would be looking at. I think what you've done, if we look at the bottom rendering, I think it really does add some distinction to different parts of the building. I think it some variety of material, some variety of where the windows are and where the trees show up. I think it really does reflect an attempt by the applicant to respond to the concerns we raised in the last meeting. And I think this is a huge step in the direction we're looking to see the revised rendering of what this side of the building would look at. So I appreciate the work that you did, both to address Erin's questions on electrical, but also on concern I raised on the side of the building. So I'm pretty satisfied with what you've presented with us tonight. I don't know if anybody else has any comments they'd like to raise before we move to the next stage of taking a vote on this application. Or if anything the staff needs to raise. I see Erin's hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have maybe a couple notes to put on the record about sort of the transportation, and I just want to recognize some public comment on the sort of difficulties of Warren Street and it being a one-way and turning left and turning right and the sort of congestion around that. I also appreciate this isn't really like, you know, this as a residential use building moving from a commercial use building, there, you know, from the traffic studies, there's not a negative impact pertaining to this proposal. So these comments, I don't feel, at least on my reading of the traffic reports, mitigate or require mitigation from this particular proposal. However, I do just want to raise that, you know, the community has, you know, maybe raised for staff and for mobility. The community has raised concerns around the traffic on Warren Street, and especially because Warren Street is sort of a natural desire path from Kendall Square, the west side of Kendall, towards McGrath, and the sort of traffic along that street. So maybe the sort of comment that I'm making here is more for staff, and, you know, maybe as more development happens in this corridor, I would perhaps, especially in the early phases of planning, maybe encourage, you know, what can we do working with developers to make traffic along Warren Street maybe flow more naturally and have this sort of left and right turn lane that seems to want to happen anyway. Or somehow dealing with, you know, how do we deal with the cars coming through that area? So this is maybe more of a note as opposed to a condition, but I just wanted to raise that, you know, that public comment is noted. And I think there are probably some pretty good ideas in there that might be incorporated in future developments, or as we think about the street network in this area, especially it being so close to South Street, which will be realigned at some point. And that's it. That's what I've got for that comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any comments or questions of the applicant for now, before we move forward to the next stage of this process? I do want to thank the applicant and staff and my fellow members in trying to move this application to a better place. I think it is in a place where it should be. I don't know if anybody else on the applicant's team wanted to speak. I do know there was a request that somebody be unmuted, but I don't know if that's necessary at this point. I also
No,
don't
Mr. Chair.
Way down.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, no, we're good. We appreciate it. We know we've done a lot of work on this project. We really appreciate all of your feedback, everybody on the board, staff. I think, as you said, it's a better project, and that's the reason for the process. So I don't think we have anything else we need to add. We really appreciate it. We know you've got a long night and agenda, so we'll let you move to the next step. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilor. So following public testimony, review of the submitted materials and deliberation of the required considerations outlined by the zoning ordinance, I move to approve with the conditions laid out in the staff memorandum, the site plan approval to develop a 4-story LEED Platinum general building in the mid-rise 4 zoning district, seconded by Aaron. Chair votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Aaron votes aye.
Debbie votes aye.
Okay. And following public testimony, review of the submitted materials and deliberation of the required considerations outlined by the ordinance, I move to approve of the conditions outlined in the staff memorandum. The special permit for a household living principal use for 41 dwelling units, seconded by Jahan. Chair votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Aaron votes aye.
Debbie votes aye.
Wonderful. We have a unanimous vote on both of the required votes by the planning board. Congratulations to the applicant and good luck.
Thank you very, very much. Have a great night. Thank you. Thank you.
You as well. What I'd like to do now is open up the applicant for 231 to 249 Elm Street and 6 to 8 and number 12 Grove Street, all of which are one application. I would invite them to be unmuted. I would also invite them to share their screens as needed.
This is Risa speaking. I see Brett Benson and Andrew Flynn's hands raised. Brett Benson, I'm making you the presenter. And Andrew Flynn, you should be unmuted. I believe you're self-muted on your end.
Great. Thank you very much, Risa. And thank you very much to the planning board for inviting us back this evening. We're very grateful for the opportunity to have a discussion 2 weeks ago, and we look forward to just continuing that discussion this evening. What I was going to do was ask Brett to maybe just give a very high level kind of refresher overview of the project. We certainly could go through more detail to the extent it would be helpful for the board. But we'll take your direction on that, and we certainly have have all of the detail on hand to the extent it's helpful to put to it over the course of the discussion. So thank you again for having us this evening, and I'll pass it over to Brett.
All right. Good evening. Thanks, Andrew. Thank you to the board for your time tonight. My name is Brett Benson. I'm a principal at Utile. We're a Boston-based architecture and urban design firm with offices on Kingston Street in downtown Boston. Thank you all for your time tonight. Just as a quick overview of the project, we went through the full presentation with you 2 weeks ago, and I'm happy to go through it in detail again. Just to orient everybody to the site, we're about a half block from Davis Square on Elm Street. The site extends from the Burn to Grove Street and around to number 20 Grove. And as I said at our meeting last time, we're really incredibly excited and also very humbled to be working in Davis Square. We know that it's such a special place for Somerville and all throughout Boston. And we're grateful to be able to share our design for a building that we think that fits very comfortably into the square. So just as a quick review, and then I'm going to pause. The building is 4 stories tall with ground floor retail and lab or office space on the upper floor. It's approximately 128,000 square feet in all. It includes public underground car parking and bike parking for tenants and the public. And the project will be LEED Platinum certifiable and is fully zoning compliant, including the mechanical penthouse and small scale retail amendments. So I will pause right there, and Mr. Chair, you can let me know if you want me to go through the rest of the presentation or if it'd be better to be respectful of your time to pause and hear any comments you have.
So because we did have a pretty fulsome presentation at our last meeting, and we did have public testimony that was presented orally, and we also had left the written comment period open until last Friday. I'm not certain that any further presentation, unless something has changed, needs to continue for the refreshment of the recollection of the members of the board. Because unless something has changed, it's my understanding that we're not being provided new information. This isn't going to reopen public testimony. I do want to let the board know that it's my, and Riza can correct me if my information is outdated as of a few hours ago, but there was supposed to be or there is in process, a covenant with the city that I do not believe has yet been executed. So even if we are completely and fully satisfied with the application this evening, it is the practice of the planning board not to vote on an application until that covenant has been signed. So if you could let me know if there's anything that is new information in your application that we haven't seen before and that people haven't had an opportunity to provide testimony on, I would appreciate that, because if you want to cut it short, we're happy to dig into our own discussions internally.
Mr. Chair, the presentation's the same as it was 2 weeks ago, so we'll cut to the chase and be respectful of your time tonight.
Thank you very much. I would love to hear my colleagues' thoughts on the application. I certainly have my own, but as is so often the case, mine is informed very much by the opinions and the questions of my colleagues. So I would ask my colleagues if they have any questions or comments of the applicant or of staff. Now that we've received testimony on this, that has now closed, if anybody's got any questions that they would like to ask, or any comments or concerns or general thoughts. Yes, Debbie.
Just in hearing the testimony at the last meeting and some of the written testimony that I received, a big neighborhood concern does seem to be what type of lab use, what type of materials might be used in the space above. And I gather it's maybe still premature and you don't have a tenant in mind at the moment, but curious to hear kind of what your diligence has borne as to what type of tenants you think might be attracted to this type of building in this area, and what type of uses you might be anticipating.
Sure, this is Andrew Flynn, and thank you again for your time this evening and for the question. You know, at the moment, something that we are very focused on, and that we have been throughout the design process, is really designing a building that is probably as versatile as possible. You know, I think that this building is slightly different, and again, I don't want to generalize or mischaracterize anything, but I think compared to some bona fide lab projects, I think this project has been designed where it very well may be, you know, traditional office, or it might be ultimately a lab user, or perhaps a combination thereof. So I think in terms of the building, in the way that we've designed it, we've tried to embed that flexibility. We have not started any leasing of the building at this time. And so I think ultimately it could be full of non-lab users, it could be occupied by lab users, or it could be a combination thereof. And I think, you know, ultimately, in terms of those standards, we would endeavor them to be kind of consistent with other projects across the city.
Debbie, do you, before you continue, if you have additional questions, I wouldn't mind doing a quick interjection if you don't mind.
Sorry, that's fine.
Okay, I'm going to ask Riza if she could address, because I know that she and I had a discussion on the planning board authority on how and in what capacity we can regulate and condition certain types of lab uses. And I don't want to speak out of turn because I am not the planning professional that she is, but to the extent that she can address this, I would respect her opinion on your question.
This is Raisa speaking, Mr. Chair. There is a biosafety ordinance that is currently in effect, and there is a biosafety committee that the applicant will have to submit with after receiving their building permit that will have the final say on that. It's not necessarily the planning board's purview. Does that answer your question, Mr. Chair?
It answers my question on what we can, I think, reasonably condition based on your understanding of our authority. I don't know if that answers Debbie's question, but I think it might put it into perspective.
Yeah, it does. No, I assume there were other jurisdictions on what actually comes in here, but I did want to get a sense on, in terms of what sort of work the developer has done here in terms of getting a sense of what type of tenants they think they might be attracting. But realizing, by the time this is built, times change, and so they're probably building for maximum potential flexibility on types of tenants. But it is helpful to hear, I think for the community as well, that, we're not the end all in terms of whether and if this gets approved. There's other, pieces that the applicant has to go through before they can put a certain bio use in this space. Thank you.
This is Raisa speaking, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to let you know that I do see Jennifer Schultz hands raised.
Mm-hmm. I would like to please have Attorney Schultz be unmuted so she can make a presentation or response.
This is Raisa speaking. Jennifer, you have been unmuted. You are self-muted on your end.
Okay, great. Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So I did just want to add in response to sort of the follow-up question from Debbie, and in addition to what Andrew Flynn pointed out. So what the developers has done or is doing with the design right now is designing essentially the HVAC system, the air ventilation system for the core and shell support for the building to have the capacity for, up through really a BSL-3 lab, because the ventilation systems needed for BSL-2 and BSL-3 are identical. It is about how much air is moved through the space and how quickly generally air is recirculated every 10 minutes or less in all of these labs. And so in terms of what the building has the capacity physically to handle is, at the completion of core and shell, it could be either of those BSL levels, and of course a BSL-1 as well. But the mechanical system would be over-engineered if this ends up being an office building. Doesn't mean, just means they'll have fresher air to breathe, or that the system may be underutilized to its maximum capacity. But so the stage that we're at now is really about the air ventilation system, so that the building has the capacity to circulate fresh air in and out at the rate that these sorts of biology labs would require, which just means more fresh air in on a much more regular basis than your average office building or retail space would require. So that's just the only note that I wanted to add, because it was also pointed out by Raisa that there are other regulations already in the works in Somerville. And I suppose just one more thing that I would add is that there are also in place already both local, state, and federal regulations regarding whatever biological use or, potential chemistry use, although that is less likely, could eventually go into the building. There is your local building and fire code, of course, has regulations that do speak directly to the fire and life safety mechanisms for the building, which goes to through a lot of the central function of any of these labs is really about, the fire safety and fire code, other local fire department regulations in relation to the storage and precise amount of any chemicals. The Massachusetts Department of Transportation and Department of Public Health do regulate in every lab of every level in the state the storage and ultimate disposal and hauling of any biological waste, regardless of sort of hazardous material level. And of course, if there is any pharmaceutical manufacturing, then you are regulated by the FDA, the CDC, and potentially also the DEA. So while it is certainly not uncommon for localities to have their own regulations, usually couched within their Board of Health is the most common. There are already in place multiple levels of regulation for whatever type of lab, if any, ultimately does end up in this space. So I did just want to note that for the record.
Thank
That's
you very much. Folks, I don't know if my colleagues have any response or questions to the information you just provided. Yes, Erin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe just one clarification to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly, which is sort of from my understanding of the biosafety committee and the, as Attorney Schultz just described, this is sort of the shell of the building. What we're approving right now is a building that in theory could house a lab. And then when a tenant is identified, it would then be the tenant's responsibility. This is the sort of clarification piece. If it could clarify, it would be the tenant's responsibility then to basically go before the biosafety committee and get that approval for the lab when they decide that, yes, this should be a lab use. So if they could just be confirmed that decoupling mechanism between the building being built and the lab being instantiated.
Sure. I don't know if you'd like Raisa to respond to the biosafety committee piece of that, because that is in the works actively in Somerville. What I can say is yes, generally in municipalities across the Commonwealth, the decoupling that you described is precisely the manner in which it works.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Schultz. And Raisa, could you clarify from the City of Somerville perspective, maybe just for the record, that decoupling is in place here in Somerville?
This is Raisa speaking. I can confirm that it will be the responsibility of the tenant, to the best of my knowledge at this time.
Okay, thank you, Raisa.
Yes, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to go on the record to state that I certainly appreciate my fellow board member Howard Easton's question, because this was something that was also top of mind for me as well. And I do have a brief question for Raisa. And I'm not expecting a response for this, at least during this meeting, but I'd like to better understand if if the City of Somerville has made similar approvals in a square or busy commercial area for this type of lab space. If there's any history or precedent, it doesn't have to be Davis Square, it could be one of the other squares. I would just be very curious to hear about that. And this is something really for our next board meeting, if possible.
This is Raisa speaking. I can get that information for you.
Thank you so much, Raisa, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Do my fellow board members have any more questions of staff or of the applicant? Yes, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have two questions that are unrelated to the matter that we just discussed, and both of these questions are directed towards the applicant. The first question is around the retail leasable space. I understand the Burren's going to be continuing operations, and I really appreciate the applicant's commitment towards that. However, I'd love to hear some additional thoughts regarding supporting independent retailers or many of the retailers that may desire to enter the Davis Square market but may not have the necessarily financial resources to do so. If there's any thoughts and comments regarding the retail side of things. So that's the first question. And then the second question that I have is around Grove Street. So I certainly appreciate the level of improvements to Grove Street, and I think that's very much welcome. However, I do want to better understand whether there could be some sort of pedestrian bicyclist activation that could that the applicant can consider, because based on the written testimony, there are some concerns from Grove Street residents, and while I appreciate the efforts of the applicant, I just wanted to see if there's something else that could be done. So those are the two questions. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much for the questions, Jahan. With regards to the retail, it's something we've kind of worked on and calibrated very thoughtfully throughout this process over the past few years. Obviously, working with the Burn and keeping them operational throughout construction and keeping them in place thereafter has been, it's been a lot of credit to our design and engineering team and the team at the Burn to just figure out how to do that in a spirit of partnership. So that's obviously a cornerstone to the project. With regard to the remaining retail space, we've redesigned it a couple of times, most recently to comply with the small business overlay and some of the dimensional elements of that overlay. And in so doing, we really endeavored to generate a number of efficiencies in the retail space to allow some of the tenants that you were describing to have it be more attainable and more affordable for them, through elements such as shared bathrooms, shared loading, so that one of the challenges, frankly, with the dimensions of the small business retail overlays, just how do you make some of those spaces kind of viable by the time you put in bathrooms and kitchens and other things. So, we've really endeavored to program it in a thoughtful way so that to kind of remove some of those barriers for such tenants and to make sure that these smaller spaces can actually be, viable, feasible, and sustainable. And I'd say, we have ongoing conversations with a number of existing tenants that are in the building today. We have had some who have come to us and said they are not interested in coming back into the new building. And we have had some who said they are interested. And, I think collectively, both our team and some of those prospective tenants, we've been waiting, the ground's been shifting underneath us a little bit with all the kind of retail redesigns and, this process. But I think our intent is certainly to continue to engage in good faith with any tenants that would be interested in coming back, and certainly with any, new tenants that would be interested in coming. And I think, something that we're very excited about and well aligned with is now that the ground floor retail space conforms and aligns with the small business overlay dimensions, I think it is very well suited for a range of tenants. This isn't just space for kind of your big box corner stores. I won't name names, but there's not really any room here for a large pharmacy or a large, I think it's ultimately going to generate a very kind of diverse and unique tenant base, which is certainly something that we think enhances the building, both for those who might be working upstairs, as well as, for all residents of Davis Square. So I think hopefully the design of the ground floor kind of really will engender the type of outcome that I think you were alluding to.
And this is Brett Benson from UTL. I'm going to just scroll quickly through the presentation to get to the ground floor plan so that I can try to address the question about pedestrian and bicycle activation on Grove Street.
Yes, and Brett, I might just say, and I know, Brett, you'll give a much more eloquent answer, but I'll just say, John, it's great. I'm glad you brought the point up, and it's something we've endeavored to balance carefully, is kind of the activation, but not the overactivation of Grove Street. You know, as we work through this process, we kind of, you know, some of the feedback we received was that obviously the Elm Street frontage, you know, should be vibrant and very active with the retailers we were just discussing. But as you turn that corner, I think, you know, I think there's a lot of support and an opportunity to kind of enhance the condition along Grove Street versus, you know, its existing conditions, but to not overdo it per se as you get closer to kind of the residential node, you know, on that back side. So I think it's something we've endeavored to make sure that it's kind of enhanced and activated, but not over activated. And certainly, Brett, I know you can walk through some of the details, but you know, we're always open-minded on any enhancements we could make.
Yeah, I think that puts it well. We've heard pretty consistently in our public meetings that the neighbors didn't want it to be overactivated on Grove Street in terms of the types of uses that happen on the ground floor, really looking for something a little bit more quieter. In terms of the sidewalk in the public realm, though, we do think that it's one of the greatest transformations for the project. The current Grove Street is in pretty bad disrepair and not a great place to experience. There's a surface parking lot behind the existing buildings. The sidewalks are in disrepair. And so what you can see in this plan is that we've set the building back 9 feet from the property line, which results in an almost 16-foot wide sidewalk along Grove Street, where we get permeable pavers along the street edge, new street trees, bicycle parking all along there, as well as a very ample and accessible walkway along the building, and the potential for street furniture, planters, and the like, to really just make that public realm along Grove Street feel very inviting and neighborhood friendly. I hope that answers your question.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just appreciate the level of detail that's been provided. I just wanted to address the retail side first, the retail question first. You know, I'm really heartened to hear that there is this understanding of supporting independent retailers, particularly since we're coming out of this pandemic period where these independent retailers have been negatively impacted, and in particular retailers of immigrant women or socioeconomic disadvantaged backgrounds in particular. They certainly need support. I think in many ways, Somerville's diversity in commercial and retail spaces comes through the various entrepreneurial endeavors. So I certainly appreciate that, and I would certainly encourage the applicants to remain steadfast in that commitment. As far as the second question is concerned, I definitely appreciate the response. I do have a follow-up, if I may, with that ramp to parking space in particular. I just want to better understand whether there's going to be some sort of an alert system, warning system for the pedestrians who are walking back and forth. Just so I just want to understand, depending on the level of traffic, cars and other vehicles exiting out, will the pedestrians be able to receive some sort of forewarning if there is pedestrian traffic? Would love to hear some thoughts on that.
Yes, this is Brett Benson again from UTL. There will be a pedestrian warning system to make that space very safe for pedestrians and bicyclists potentially crossing that zone of mixed traffic, vehicular, bike, and pedestrian. We've also set back that entrance to the parking area so that there's enough room for cars to queue without blocking the through passageway of pedestrians and bikes along Grove Street.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for the clarification. I certainly appreciate the level of effort and diligence involved, and thank you to the applicant, and thank you, Mr. Chair, as well.
Thanks, John. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to ask the applicant before I have some comments and questions myself? So I do want to thank all of you for your application. I will say this, right? So if this was a building that was being designed to replace an old factory or an old auto use, or an old junkyard, something that we regularly see in Union Square and Boynton Yards and things like that, I think we can look at it in a vacuum. This is not to say that I'm not supportive of your application, because I am. I think you've done a very excellent job trying to fit into the existing neighborhood. I think you've done a great job listening to the residents from what we were able to gather through testimony. One of the things I actually thought I was going to hear more from the neighborhood that I didn't, so I'm going to ask the question. So I've lived in the city my entire life. I used to live actually on Grove Street for a number of years when I was in law school. And I have my mother's entire side of her family has lived in the Davis Square area for over a half century, right? So there are a lot of existing retail uses that are in this block that have been on this block and in Davis Square for decades and decades and decades. When we were first looking at the Davis Square neighborhood plan a number of years ago, which is still under kind of consideration and discussion, one of the main issues that we heard and that I shared was, what is the path forward for some of the long-standing businesses that fit kind of in this block? And while the planning board doesn't have the authority to mandate that certain businesses stay where they are, I'm just wondering what your discussions have looked like with some of the existing tenants that will inevitably be displaced by the construction of this building, irrespective of whether they may come back, because they are mostly small businesses. They are local businesses. They are, in some cases, long-standing businesses in the Davis Square area. We have often kind of taken a look at that to see what we can do for certain commercial tenants that want to stay that can't. I mean, irrespective of the fact that your building meets all the requirements to be built, and I actually think it's a very nice looking building. I think it's going to be a great addition to the square. My concerns are a little bit more parochial in how you have engaged with the existing residential, commercial tenants that exist on the block. Whether they want to stay, whether they don't want to stay. Jahan had a lot of really good questions about the tenants that may come in to the retail space. But I'm kind of looking at it as, where do we go when this block is in construction, and a lot of places that people have looked at as neighborhood staples may not be there.
Sure, Mr. Chair, this is Andrew Flynn, and thank you very much for the questions and kind of the comments and context. And I think it's something that we share, and it's a perspective we've tried to be very mindful of throughout this process over the past few years, and it's certainly been a unique few years with the pandemic in between there. And as Brett alluded to, we do approach this and with a real degree of stewardship, and I think we're very kind of reverent of the legacy of what's happened on the site in the past, and what hopefully will stay there in the future in terms of the fabric of the retailers and some of the retailers themselves. So I think to provide some context, kind of as you asked for, I can touch on a few things, and I think some of the conversations with the tenants, well, all the conversations, are kind of private, and not that I wouldn't be willing to share them, but I think some of the feedback we've received from tenants is something that I want to, respect kind of, the privacy of some of those conversations. And I'd say that they've come in a few different forms and fashions. There are a couple of tenants, including one or two, household names that you'd think would want to be there long term, that have just indicated to us for certain, generational reasons and other, things, whether they be family reasons or long-term business planning reasons, that they are not interested in coming back. Some of those, frankly, which surprised us. I think some which we thought would be very interested in coming back, would be very viable in coming back. And but we're have indicated to us that they're not interested in coming back. So I think that's kind of one category. I think the second category is we've had discussions with a couple of tenants, I can think of two specifically, who do want to come back, who are, I think doing well business-wise and kind of in terms of long-term sustainability of their business, are thinking about expansion in general and have said, have discussed with us a framework where perhaps during the construction period that they would open a new store because they've had plans to open, whether it's a second store or a fifth store or whatever it might be, kind of use that construction period to focus on that expansion and then be ready to come back into this space, kind of once that expanded location perhaps is stabilized and up and running. So I think there's been, there's two tenants in particular we've had like-kind discussions where we would actually try to sequence that out with them in terms of, when they would maybe close their current operation, perhaps focus on something else, and then maybe come back here in a new expression. And then there's the third category, which you alluded to, which is, I think, some folks who, don't know if they want to come back, don't know if maybe they can come back. I think, again, we don't necessarily have room for everybody to come back as well, given kind of the way it's designed. And I think in some of those cases, I think what we've tried to focus on is just communication and transparency, and that, giving folks as long of a lead time notice on what timing might be for construction, and perhaps, helping them to the extent possible, during that extended notice period to maybe help them find alternate locations within the square or, otherwise. So I think those are kind of the three categories. It's folks who have indicated they're not interested in coming back, folks who are interested have indicated they are, and we're kind of working through some sequencing with them. And then kind of the third category, which is, we want to just be as transparent and communicative as possible, and obviously work in good faith, but realizing, we might not be able to bring everybody back.
So I very much appreciate the response to my concerns. I think it's very thoughtful. I do recall in the past, and I would ask for Bryce to work with me in the next couple of weeks before we revisit this application, when hopefully a covenant has been signed and the board is prepared to move forward with the application. I'd like to try to recall with some specificity how the board has dealt with the displacement of commercial tenants that want to stay where they are. I know this has been an issue before the board before. I know we have taken some steps to mitigate that. I just don't recall in my best memory what those were. I very actually much respect the response that there are some longstanding tenants that you've represented might just not want to come back, right? I think those are always private discussions and private kind of feelings of business owners that we don't always see. I know that there have been a number of businesses in Somerville that have been longstanding businesses that the community wants to stay, but the business owner is just like, well, I'm kind of done. I want to go, and everybody else is like, oh, development pushed them out, and that's not necessarily the case. So I respect your representation that there are some business owners that just don't necessarily want to come back without knowing who they are. I think that's a very important thing for people to understand as we look at the changing face of the business community in Davis Square. So where I want to go with this, and I don't know, I think Aaron, did you have another question, or were yours answered? I see your hand. I'm going to ask you to speak in just a second. I just want to finish my thought, if you don't mind. What I would like to ask of Raisa is to work with me over the next couple of weeks to figure out how the board has handled commercial tenants that want to stay but can't, or are trying to figure out ways to deal with displacement, the steps that the board has taken to mitigate those concerns, because I think they are important, because they are valuable members of our community as well. I don't know where we're going to go with that, but I think having a historical answer to the way we've addressed this issue in the past can help inform how we deal with it now. So, Erin, you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I have a couple other questions actually outside of the economic impact, if I may, which is maybe one on the public space and sort of public accessibility of some of the building amenities, specifically the rooftop garden, and then a couple, or really one question on transportation. So first, I'll just throw it out there for the rooftop terrace. I think is a really nice design feature of the building, and I was wondering if the applicant had considered making that a public amenity, similar to the Kendall Square roof garden or something along those lines, which is usable by both the tenant and the public at large. And then the second question is around the garage plan. I know this is a public garage in that anyone could get, in theory, access to it, but will be privately managed. And I would like some clarification on how that sort of public accessibility is envisioned. So you can imagine monthly passes, you can imagine hourly parking similar to how the current surface lots are. So you can imagine the monthly parking might be more serving of the new upper story tenants, whereas the hourly parking might be more similar to the existing surface lots, or possibly some combination thereof. So I would love to get, the applicant's perspective on those two things, the rooftop garden, and then how they envision the parking situation.
Sure. This is Andrew. Thank you, Erin, for the questions. I think with regards to public access in the building, I think, as a general matter, as we're thought of the ecosystem of this building, public engagement and public use is something that has been, a core pillar of it, as evidenced with the burn and the way we've kind of designed the retail all along Elm Street, and certainly the parking as well, which is, which I can touch on that in more detail in a moment, but certainly is, a public amenity and publicly accessible. I think with regards to the rooftop, at this time, it is not envisioned that it would be open to the public. We do kind of view that as, frankly, in what is kind of an increasingly challenging leasing environment, we view that as an element of the building that would kind of need to be used to help lease some of the office floors. So that is, from our standpoint, we view the rooftop space as kind of attached to the office floors, and likely not publicly accessible, in order for us to kind of properly compete in the tenant marketplace. With regards to the parking, it's certainly, we work closely with the mobility team. All 77 spaces are fully publicly accessible. None of them will be tethered to any of the office leases. And we do envision, and again, I don't want to speak with perfect precision, but I recall in our discussions with mobility, they shared with us, and so I know we have all of the details somewhere, kind of the rules and regulations for how that parking would be priced. And certainly it's all done on a market basis. For instance, you can't give the tenants a discount, the office tenants a discount, because then ultimately those would kind of just become office leasing spaces. So from our standpoint, I think we certainly envision there to be a range of, hourly rates, half day rates, full day rates, overnight rates, monthly rates, perhaps weekly rates. So I think, we'd work with a prevailing kind of parking operator in the city of Somerville to help us establish those, and certainly want them to be in line with what's available for other parking.
Okay, thank you. That's clarifying. I'm kind of imagining some of the other parking garages either in Kendall or Seaport where it's you can drive up and if there's space, you can park by the hour, or if you want to pay an exorbitant amount, you can get a monthly pass.
Right. And I think, just along these lines, a net benefit is, at the moment, there's only 19 parking spaces out back there, I believe. So I think hopefully this will enhance access, to parking in the square, which I know is something that's important for, folks to be able to access the square, and also, for the retailers to remain viable and kind of keep the ecosystem healthy.
Yeah, thank you. It is helpful, and it's certainly helpful to hear that you're envisioning hourly, especially supporting these smaller retail establishments that would develop on the first floor. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are my two questions.
I appreciate that, Aaron. Is there anything else that my fellow board members would like to ask or say before I move to continue this to the next meeting, when hopefully we may have a covenant signed? Seeing none, I will move to continue discussion of this agenda item to the meeting on September 8th, seconded by Debbie. Chair votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Aaron votes aye.
Debbie votes aye.
Great. Thank you all very much, and thank you very much for the applicant for your responses to our questions. What I'd like to do actually is take just a quick 5-minute recess before we take up the last two agenda items. So we'll reconvene at 7:23, if that's okay. Thank you all. Okay. Are we ready for the last two?
Yep.
Okay, let's proceed. Lisa, can you let us know when we're back on?
You're back on.
Okay. Oh my God, we're back again. We have two items left on our agenda. We have 325 to 375 Assembly Row and 394 McGrath Highway. I'm going to take 325 to 375 Assembly Row first of those two. So if I could please have the applicant, their representative and their team be unmuted and have their screen shared as they need to have them be done.
This is Risa speaking. I do see a hand raised, Mr. Chair, for David Webster. I am unmuting you, David Webster. You are self-muted on your end.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Are you the presenter for tonight?
I am. But I gotta figure out how to share my screen.
Just give me 1 second. I will be making you a presenter in a few seconds. This is Risa speaking. David, now you are a presenter.
Okay. So can you all see the rendering? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can see you and hear you.
You can see the rendering?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, and thank you for having us tonight. We are always trying to figure out how to improve things at Assembly Row. As part of that, we are trying to figure out how to make this linear park area between the smoke shop, barbecue shop, and Cafe Nero more inviting, more accessible for more people. We initially started with a pair of bocce courts here when this first opened about 5 years ago, and frankly, they just they've been underutilized and not that successful. They're not regulation-sized courts. They don't get much use, and we would really like to do something to make this space more inviting and welcoming for more people. So our thought is to replace the bocce courts with a public fire feature and really increase the amount of furnishings, different types of seating options available to people here. We thought the fire feature is something that could really be used year round. Right now, the bocce courts get covered up in the winter, and the space just isn't as active as we'd like it to be. So the proposed fire feature is right here in the center of the rendering. The area where the bocce courts are today is sort of outlined in a rectangular frame in the decking underneath these columnar trees and the fire feature. And that's the extent of what we're trying to do here. It's not much more complicated than that. Happy to take questions.
I don't have many questions. I always respect somebody realizing that the original vision that they had for a space isn't working the way they wanted to, and try to make it a little bit better, particularly where it's a public space like this. The only question I have is on the fire feature and how safety around it's going to be managed. I'm just not very familiar with kind of public fire features where you don't have a fire monitoring staff nearby or something.
So it's a pretty well-regulated use in the Massachusetts code, the Massachusetts Plumbing Code. There's a requirement for an emergency shut-off button, which we're going to place on this concrete pier over here on the left. There's today it houses some utility meters and things like that. So there would be a very visible sign with an emergency shut-off switch on this. It's essentially a utility closet, but we've tried to dress it up with some placemaking. There'll be a timer, and the operations and the operations staff for Federal Realty turn it on and turn it off on a regular basis, but there'll be an emergency switch, which is required by code as well.
Okay. I figured all that was going to be the case. I just wanted to ask the question because I didn't know the answer. I think it's good to know, and good to let anybody know who might be in the audience who's also got a question.
Sure.
So, I mean, I'll just say I'm obviously supportive of what I consider to be a reasonably minor amendment to this space. It's just an enhancement to the space in a way that makes it more usable than where you've already got it. Like, I know the area pretty well. I'm down there quite a bit myself, and you're right. It's kind of a dead underutilized space that I would love to see more activation on. I'm going to open it up to members of the planning board to ask questions or express concerns or other comments before I open it up to public testimony. But I appreciate your presentation tonight and the rendering of the proposed space. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Yes, Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I sort of second everything. It makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you guys realizing that, civic space could be better and coming here with a proposal to make it better. I mean, my only comment is probably something that you're already thinking about, which is consider our, sort of accessibility and ADA sort of best practices, especially for the tables that are being proposed and things of that nature, so that
Sure.
People with sort of all sort of mobility requirements would be able to utilize the public space. Which, I mean, I'm sure there are sort of rules and regulations around that, but my only comment would be to keep that in mind.
It's a great comment. We will definitely keep it in mind.
Thank you, Aaron. Do either of my other two colleagues have any comments or questions at this time? Seeing none, because this is a public hearing, I would like to open up this hearing to public testimony for anybody that wants to speak in support of the application. I would ask you to please exercise the raised hand button next to your name, and I will call you in the order in which I see. Only 10 people in attendance, and I see, I think I'm looking at all of you, and I see no hands raised. I'm going to go once, go twice, and seeing none, I will close that portion of the public hearing, and I will open up. Somebody's keyboard is very loud and unmute. I will ask for anybody that wants to speak in opposition or express concern to please exercise your raised hand button, and I will call on you in the order in which I see you. Going once, going twice. Seeing no hands raised, I'm going to close that portion of the public hearing, and I will return it to my colleagues for any further questions or comments that they have of the applicant or of staff on what I would consider to be a very minor amendment. but apparently is a major amendment according to the code. Okay. Seeing none and following the opportunity for public testimony, review of the submitted materials, and deliberation of the required considerations outlined by the zoning ordinance, I move to approve with the conditions outlined in staff memorandum. The revision to a previously issued special permit with site plan approval, subject to Planning Board 2016-14, in the Assembly Square Mixed Use District to change the permitted design of the ASQ Linear Park, seconded by Jahan. The chair votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Aaron votes aye.
Debbie votes aye.
Wonderful. Congratulations to the applicant and good luck. I hope the fire feature and trees and tables make a more useful function for the space for you.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice night. The final item that we will be discussing this evening on the agenda is on McGrath Highway. And let me scroll up. It is 394 McGrath Highway. And I would ask the applicant and the staff member who was responsible for working with the applicant to be please unmuted, and the applicant's screen to be shared as necessary so we can have a presentation on this. This is going to be a pretty substantive application. I will open it up to public testimony, but with projects like this, it is the practice of the planning board to leave it open for written testimony, and we will not be taking a vote on this evening.
This is Raisa speaking. Mr. Chair, I do see Ann Vigorito's hand raised. Ann, you are unmuted. Will you be the presenter tonight?
Good evening, Chairman Capuano, members of the Planning Board. I have my team with me. I have our architect, Will Chalifant from Calsa Design, as well as the applicant, Contempo Builders, Michael Tolkien, representative. So they are all here this evening. And great, the plans are up. So I have a brief overview and then I will hand off to our architect. So good evening, everyone. Ann Vigorito, 424 Broadway, Somerville, Massachusetts. I'm the attorney for the applicant. And as stated, Contempo Builders. The relief sought is a special permit for the household living use and site plan approval. This is the former site, just to give a little point of interest, the XL Mechanical Contractors over on McGrath Highway. It's right before you would, on that downward slope. So the proposal here, it's a little over a 6,000 square foot lot. This is an MR4 zoning district, and we'd like to construct a 4-story apartment building. This will be net zero ready, 15 dwelling units, 5 1-bedrooms and 10 2-bedrooms. And 3 of these units will be affordable. The units will be 4 seal condominiums. There will be 5 at-grade parking spaces provided there, and there will be also provided 15 long-term bicycle parking spaces and 2 short-term bicycle spaces. This site is also located within a quarter mile of a transit area. We did have 2 neighborhood meetings regarding this project. The first one was in May 26th of 2021, and then our second was November 15th of 2021. In between, we had 3 trips to the UDC, and I believe you will see the updates, and Will Chalifant will go through those for you momentarily. The meetings were well attended by the public. The neighborhood did have questions. They were fully answered at that time. One thing, and I had a little bit of a senior moment before this meeting, the architect and I were discussing, the fact that there's not going to be any commercial space on the first level, which is generally, consistent in an MR zoning district. But the neighborhood was very, very much against any type of commercial space in that area. So, of course, we, work with the neighborhood and, we came to the conclusion of that, this would be the best thing for this project. And at this time, I will hand off to Will, who will be kind enough to go through the plans, and then we can come back with whatever questions the board may have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ann. Can everyone hear me? Because I have a new web. Okay, great. Thank you. Good evening. Good evening, Will Chalfant from Khalsa Design. Nice to see all of you again. As Ann has mentioned, this is a proposed multifamily residential project on McGrath. We're kind of at the base of, we're halfway up and at the same time at the base of Prospect Hill. And it's sort of a unique situation. So as Ann mentioned, this is currently the Excel Mechanical. The building literally is built into the earth almost here. It takes up basically the entire site. So there's not a lot of breathing room from that road right now. And I know the eventual plan is to quote ground McGrath. I believe that's underway. And so I think this project will be something that will benefit greatly from that whole process. But I'll quickly go through the site plan here. The building is outlined, the footprint rather is outlined in red. So we did have a couple meetings with the UDC where we were asked to reduce parking slightly. And in addition to that, gain some bike space in the back that was actually housed. So we relocated some parking and gained this bike room. But the ground floor contains 2 dwelling units, a lobby off the street, and then this driveway where we've recessed the garage door. The reasoning for that is, as you know, right now that's quite a street. It's a bit of a toboggan slope, and so if you're going to make that right in there, it's nice to have a little bit of breathing room before the door opens up for those 5 spaces. Not that there's a lot of in and out traffic, but that was the thinking behind that. So again, 15 dwelling, oh, I'm sorry. Hang on one second. Gosh. I apologize. I have a new mouse and we'll leave it at that. So.
I'd say you're also way better at sharing your screen than I am, so don't.
Well, baby steps for me. This is a win. So I'd like to go to the landscape plan. So we're gaining some green space along the front here, which obviously does not exist now. We're also preparing, because this is a pedestrian street, for a potential future 12-foot sidewalk there. So that's why the building has been pulled back slightly. We are adding a new large tree in the rear. I don't know what happened there. Apologize. Okay. New large tree in the rear, as well as some existing shrubs. There's actually an existing retaining wall here, which we're going to be growing some new plants along. And then on this side here, we're trying to be respectful of our neighbors, so we're providing some low growing wall covered, like ivy type, along that side of the building. We meet our green score requirements. Obviously, that is difficult to do with the amount of open space here at grade level. We achieved that up above. I'll get to that shortly. So, if you like, I can go through the zoning elements of this, but this simply outlines the fenestration requirements that the city has for buildings in the MR zone. So we're compliant in that respect. We have a diagram here outlining our proximity to our existing abutters. We want to be cognizant of that because obviously this is a very unique spot in Somerville as far as its view corridors to the city. So we did meet with neighbors, work through some perspectives to outline, whose view was going to be affected and if it was. And actually this site is somewhat situated down enough where we're really, we're not affecting views of anyone that spoke up. I will say that, we spoke to everyone. So just a quick summary of the ground floor. Again, 2 units, a small lobby space. It's served by 2 stairwells and an elevator. We've got our bike room in the rear and our trash enclosed in a horizontal cedar fence. Up above, 5 units per floor. These are small sort of efficiency type units. 2 beds are only, well, I don't want to say only, but around 830 square feet, while most of the 1 beds are 500. So these are probably not family style units, more young urban professionals or empty nesters. So again, floors 2, 3, and 4 basically stack on top of each other. And then we get to the common roof deck, which is split up amongst public and a couple of private decks. So I think while this image is attractive, I'd like to go to the landscape plan, which kind of really exemplifies what we're trying to do up here, because of where we are and our proximity to the road and adjacent buildings and frankly McGrath Highway, we want to make the oasis up on top. So we're really trying to, and this is how we're achieving our green score requirements. So we're really making this a lush space where where all tenants can take advantage of it, with different views looking in both directions here. We've got this deck and this deck are private to the units directly below them, while these two will be public. And the whole building, this is serviced by the elevator as well. So all residents will be able to get up there. And additionally, it's allowing us to really screen all the mechanical equipment by grouping it. And we're going to be raising that slightly and shielding it so that it's condensed. Yes, no pun intended there with the condensers. So, mouse. I'm teasing everyone. I apologize with the next slide. So here are the elevations of the building. What we've tried to do is use very traditional materials, but more importantly, materials that we know can be executed well. So we've got cementitious clapboard, but also standing seam metal, and we're letting the material be very simple and the building shine in the sense that it's a bit of a twist on a typical, bayed, I guess I would say quad decker that you see around the city. By the way, we've made the floor plan sort of unfurl towards the city with these bays that are angled to take advantage of this view corridor, and also shield our windows from the direct abutters. We placed windows in a position so that they were not looking directly into the abutters that were close, but more importantly, this would frame these views above McGrath Highway into the great views beyond. So again, standing seam, we've got these cedar accents. So as you come down McGrath, the building almost opens up to you, sort of like sails on a boat. It's a little bit different, but it's still respectful of an architectural language that the city and residents are familiar with, but it's a little bit of a modern take on it. We've got some more rendered elevations here, just sort of outlining how it looks. And then this is a rendering sort of showing how this would look with the current day McGrath. So it's a bit of a contrast to the traditional Mansard next door, which is a beautiful building, but it also kind of transitions down into what's going on in Union Square as you take the right onto Washington and then get into Union itself. So we think it's very fitting for the area. It's going to be a nice addition to what has been sort of a bit of a industrial wasteland for a little bit, and that's not meant against anyone there. It's sort of pedestrian unfriendly, and I think adding more residences here will hopefully change that a little bit. So I do have more sheets here related to shadow studies that we've done, photometric plans, et cetera, civil, but I think at this time I'll turn it over to the board and leave it up to you for questions.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the presentation that you made. I'm going to have a couple of questions and comments in a few minutes, but I would appreciate the thoughts of my colleagues first. And because this is a public hearing, I would actually like to hear the thoughts of anybody in the public that wants to speak before I do, because I do not live in this neighborhood, and I'd like to hear folks' thoughts on the application. So if anybody on the board has any comments or questions for the applicant or staff at this time, I would certainly welcome you. Seeing none. Aaron, was that you, or is it we just, okay. Seeing none, what I'm going to do is open it up to public testimony. I would like to open it up to anybody that wants to speak in support of the application. So if you please raise your hand. I'll call on you in the order in which I see you. I see the hand of Matthew Brigida. I apologize if I mispronounced your name. But if that gentleman could please be unmuted, I would welcome his testimony. If you could please give your name and address for the record.
This is Raisa speaking. Matthew, you have been unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Yeah, Matt Mergida, and I live at 36 Church Street in Union Square. I own a two-family there and live at that residence. I lived on top of Prospect Hill for about 14 years. This property is at the base of Prospect Hill for anybody in the audience who's not aware. I'm fourth generation Somerville, going back 120 years. I have an enormous passion for the historical value of and the beauty of the architecture in this city. This is a theme that comes up for me a lot when I see new developments. Unfortunately, I was not able to attend prior meetings for this building, but the comments that I would have made in the past would have been that while this building has, aesthetic merit on its own, I have great concern that it doesn't fit the context of the environment. Prospect Hill is extremely historical and beautiful. It's easy to see in the image that's on the screen right now that directly adjacent to the right is a beautiful, beautiful mansard multifamily, as the architect was just commenting on himself. I'm not saying architecture, in my opinion, needs to stay locked in the past, but I feel that architecture, especially in such a beautiful and historical city like Somerville, it really deserves to fit context. And I don't personally feel that this architecture in any way really fits the context of what it's adjacent to. And maybe it's too late to influence that, but it would make me very pleased as a longtime resident to see more of a nod to the historical context of the city in that specific environment. I've made this kind of comment on other developments in the past, and I probably will continue in the future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Majida. The next person I see on the list is Jeffrey Roden. So if Mr. Roden could please be unmuted, and if you could please introduce yourself by way of your name and your address for the record.
This is Raisa speaking. Jeffrey, you are unmuted.
Hello, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to the board. My name is Jeffrey Rodin. I am part of the project team. I am the Passive House consultant that has been engaged in this. And I'd just like to point out a couple aspects of this building in terms of its health and its health benefits. Being to the Passive House standard, the construction will meet the highest health standards between the units as well. So, given our recent history with pandemics and things like that, these units will be built to minimize air exchanges between the units themselves, and therefore offer essentially a state-of-the-art health standard, which I think is it's happening more frequently in the Boston area, but it is also, I think, a standard that will serve as an example for future development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rodin. I'm trying to see if there's anybody else in the audience with a raised hand, and I don't see anybody. I'm going to give them till 1, until 2, and till 3. Seeing no further comment, I'm going to close that portion of the public hearing And I will ask my fellow board members if they have any questions or comments of the applicant or of staff at this time. Yes, Erin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I maybe have a couple questions about the warning system for the parking. So I'll start off with really appreciate adding more residential units to the city. Definitely needed. I appreciate the efficiency standards of the building, and I also appreciate the greenery that's being added here. I think this is very helpful to the neighborhood. This was a comment from the developer in the public, in one of the neighborhood meetings that I'm just seeking some clarification on. So one of the neighbors sort of questioned the single lane driveway, right, for two-way traffic, and some sort of safety hazards around that, which I think, sort of the appropriate condition of, well, we'll put in place a warning system, right? So that way bikes or cars going either way would be warned if there was, egress coming from the other side, right? So you don't end up with like this sort of collision aspect. And I was wondering or hoping for some clarification on what that warning system might entail, and what thought has been placed into making sure that the warning system is not too loud at 2 a.m. in the morning, because this is a residential neighborhood. And I think a warning system makes sense, but like, how are you thinking about making sure that it doesn't impact the neighbors, as it were?
I can speak to that. This is Will from Calsa Design. Thank you for the question, Aaron. So that was, I think I had mentioned recessing that garage door to sort of give a little bit of breathing room to those coming off McGrath. The way we thought about it was, if you're coming off McGrath, you are the primary concern at that point. So the sensor would be within the garage if anyone was coming in, so that they can have the ability to back up within that rear backspace, because you don't want anyone backing on McGrath Highway. That's an awful situation. Obviously, I mean, right now we've got that Taylor rental, which is kind of like playing a game of Frogger sometimes right there when there are people moving in and out. So I think this is going to be actually less congestion than when Excel was in business, only because there won't be trucks backing into that garage. So the sensor would be located within the garage. It would be a low decibel, both visual strobe and strobe is the wrong word, but it would have a light element to it within the garage, so someone would know. And then I think on the exterior, we don't want to put some sort of light on that sidewalk, only because it would, I think, in some ways create a bit of a rubberneck for cars coming down. So I think if it was recessed, what I thought could happen is it could be sort of tucked in against within the greenery there, so that if the biker was coming, it could say, here is a car coming, stop. Or I'm hesitant to do a mirror just because I think sometimes that causes more problems, reflections, glares, things like that. So I think a sensor for the pedestrians coming down McGrath that would let them know that there are cars coming. Maybe that's just simply a matter of signage right there, but my mind is cars coming off have the right of way to that pull-in area. And again, it's only 5 spaces per 15 units. I think it's going to be kind of limited traffic, but we have thought about it. And so that's, I think we can meet with the neighbors too if there's concerns over noise and sound prior to implementing it.
No, thank you. That's certainly appreciated. And I'm glad to hear that it's, a low decibel, and that you have considered, recessing that lighting and the potential rubbernecking issue off of McGrath. So thank you for the answer.
Yeah, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the applicant for providing a comprehensive view of this development, and I think that it will be beneficial to the neighborhood, particularly as my fellow board member Gino mentioned, the need for residential housing along with the affordable component. I have a pretty, I guess, broad question with respect to McGrath Highway and proposed changes to the highway to a boulevard and some changes down the road in the future. We see the picture from today's perspective, and I just wanted to get some thoughts from the applicant regarding any future impacts to the changes to McGrath and whether that's been considered as part of the project. Thank you.
So I can try to speak to that, John. I don't know if Ann can, but I mean, I think anything that's done to McGrath is going to be an improvement for this project. Literally almost anything I think would be an improvement to its current condition. So whether that's widening, the sidewalk and adding, I mean, we are proposing street trees in this area, which it's never had. So that's another great element to sort of try to, bring some, to soften this little stretch of McGrath. But that's above my pay grade as far as what's happening with McGrath. I'll defer to maybe Attorney Vigorito knows better on that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Shalafan, since we're getting formal, but Will and I have actually worked on some other projects on this, on McGrath. We worked with 434 McGrath as well, which is, just a few buildings away. So, I mean, I don't specifically know of any, new projects happening along this path or this corridor, but, one of the big things, and I know we dealt with it with 434 McGrath, is, it's a pathway, into, well, Cambridge and into Boston. So it's nice to, that, and I appreciate what one of the gentlemen from the public spoke to, about the building. Maybe it's not historical, but this building went to the Historical Commission a while back, and it was found to be not significant. So, and, complying with obviously zoning as well. But I do think, things are happening along this corridor, and I think we're going to see more of the same. And, I always try to answer someone's question to the best of my ability. But, I think, there'll be, as Will said, a softening, with the trees and the just the green space in general. And I think, we're going to see that trend. And, 434 McGrath kind of set the trend for some, for some other projects. I think that's why this area is becoming, more appreciated and more, developers are wanting to, work along this. And I think, now with 394 coming to fruition, I think we're going to see more, even just in the renovations. My office, we deal with a lot of people who come in and just, they don't want to sell their homes to developers and do, larger projects, but they want to do renovations because it definitely ignites the neighborhood to say, gee, I want to make my property, look nicer and fit in. So we're hoping for that. But if there's anything else, definitely hoping that this sets a vision.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much, Attorney, and also Mr. Shalafan. I fully recognize that this is a challenging question, and I don't mean to request a response based on what's going to happen to McGrath Highway. I guess my hope is just that this project, along with others, which, Attorney, you've correctly highlighted, is that it's going to really reshape the neighborhood, bringing the connectivity between neighborhoods, East Somerville and West Somerville, as well as bringing this new round of development, and particularly residential development, to the area. So I'm very much encouraged by that. Just to clarify, I was just concerned whether this development foresaw any challenges or any concerns with respect to some of the changes that are coming up. So perhaps a rephrase of my question is warranted. And it doesn't sound like it, but I still want to give you both an opportunity to see if there's any concerns or changes that to McGrath that will be impacting the future of this project.
I don't foresee any.
Sorry, I'll speak to that real quickly. And I think other than the difficulty in construction, John, that's going to be the biggest challenge. So we have talked about that, and we're most likely going to panelize the construction. so that it minimizes the time in and out of there. So that basically we'll build a platform, and then a truck will come in with those panels and it'll be erected on site, because we don't have a lot of lay down room there. So I don't know if that's what you're getting at, but
it is. It is. And thank you so much for clarifying. And I'm very much in favor of this project. So hoping for better things along the McGrath Highway, hopefully Boulevard stretch. And so thank you so much, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to ask this question.
Jahan, you can ask any question you want, man. Does anybody have any other comments or questions before I ask Debbie or Aaron any follow? Okay. So I have of the applicant, I have 2 questions and a comment. So my 2 questions are this: one, what is net zero ready versus net zero passive house? I assume that's a term of art, but I'm not sure what the distinction is between something being net zero ready and actually being net zero.
I can speak to that. Although I will say that our consultant, Jeff Rodin, would probably be significantly more eloquent, but I'm not sure if he's still available. The basic is this is going to be, it has to be pre-certified as part of the city's rules to the density increase. So in doing that, we need to provide them construction documents that is then sent to FIAS, and they review them, and they determine between that and the energy modeling that we're doing with our consultant, they tell us whether or not it's going to pass. And so the intent all along is to achieve that certification. I think the reason the city made it certifiable is that, during construction, there are things happen, right? So if we don't pass that certification by even just a little bit, we can't, put that badge on the front door. But we're still doing our best to be a incredibly energy efficient product. So, this will be, if it isn't certified, it'll be about as damn close as you can get.
Okay, I actually see Mr. Rodin's hand being raised. So to the extent that he wants to,
sorry, Jeff,
expand on your explanation, I'd be welcome to hear him.
So so your question is, what's the difference between net zero and net zero ready?
Yes. Yeah.
And the difference, so the definition of net zero for a building is that over a course of the year, it can produce as much energy as it uses over the course of a year. Mm-hmm. And a net zero ready building is a building that is designed in a way so that it's not net zero because you're not requiring the renewable energy, but it is ready. So things like there are conduits installed from the roof down to the mechanical room, so you can pull the required electrical cables and things like that. So that's the difference between net zero and net zero ready.
Gotcha. So it's held to a certain threshold that it cannot yet meet, but it's prepared to do so.
Exactly.
Gotcha. That's what I thought, but I just wanted to make sure, because I am not mentioned here in that capacity.
It's a very misunderstood concept.
Well, I also understand it's probably a term of art that I'm not always familiar with. So I respect your professional response. My other question has to do with the size and layout of the residential units that are proposed in this building. You've proposed, I believe, 15. I think 3 to 5 of them are going to be affordable units, permanently affordable under the city zoning ordinance. But the thing that kind of jumped out at me was the kind of heavy-handed reliance on smaller units of, an 800 square foot, 2-bedroom unit, things like that. I'm curious to know if you've thought about and have a plan for what size the affordable units that you propose to put into the building will be. Because based on a lot of the things that we've seen as a board, a lot of affordable units tend to skew heavy towards families, which an 800 square foot 2-bedroom place, won't necessarily be the most comfortable place for that tenancy.
Chairman
So-
Capuano, Attorney Garrido, and I think I'm going to have Will speak to it as well, but regarding the affordable units, the housing division of the city of Somerville, they really ultimately choose which units they want as affordable. And, and I got to tell you, I'm going to be blunt, it's pretty much non-negotiable. They usually want to take there'll probably be a unit from the top floor with some nice views, and they'll take a mixture. They won't take all 1 beds or all 2. They'll take, a sampling. I mean, with this, and I'm making a guess because we don't have, we have a schedule of units, but we don't know, we haven't finalized. But my guess is they're probably going to look for 2 2-beds and 1 1-bed. That's my educated guess. But will speak to, the sizing. Thank you.
No,
I would they actually are agreed upon. We've already agreed upon with the Affordable Housing Division on the units, and they took a mix. And that was a discussion that's already happened.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. My last question, I think I already know the answer, is the parking spaces are going to be incorporated within the building. It's going to be a commercial space, right? They're not going to be reserved for the units. I think I saw in the staff memorandum of the materials that there were going to be proposed conditions that the residents of the building would not be given because they're within the walk shed of the existing T-stop, which may or may not still be in operation at this time. They wouldn't be given residential stickers and guest passes as the code and our practice usually dictate when they're within the walk shed. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. So those are my questions. My comments, and I appreciate you scrolling through to see the materiality on the buildings, because I share some of the concerns that Mr. Brigida had raised on the way the building looks relative to some of its neighbors, right? So obviously next to a beautiful kind of Victorian multi-unit building, clearly you're not going to be that. But and I actually do like the concept of the fans that you've got coming out onto McGrath Highway and on the back of the building as well. But I'm more curious to see what the materials that you intend to use are, because they just, to be honest, they look like every other materials that are kind of used in the city right now. They look a little bit kind of generic. It actually looks similar to the project that was proposed on Medford Street just a few minutes earlier. So I'm just hoping to take a look at how that will square with some of the materials in a kind of an existing residential neighborhood, as opposed to an area that doesn't have all that much and is much more commercialized.
Sure. So just so happens the Medford Street project is also our office. So I would.
Yeah, I knew that. That's what.
Yeah, I know you did. So I would say that we did go. We had multiple meetings with the UDC, and as part of that meeting, we actually showed a version that was brick, and we showed a version that was sort of a mix of the two, and we ended up in this location. I mean, I'm not going to do it's very common in today's developments. There are a lot of materials out there. To be quite honest, there aren't a lot of people that know how to install all of these materials that are out there. And so, and that is taking nothing away from the builders in Somerville or the builders anywhere. It's just there's a shortage of certain trades that can do everything. That being said, I think we're trying to sort of fit in with what's there as far as clapboards, but then using some materials a little more durable with the metal. We did look at having a brick masonry base. I think there's still a chance we look at doing, I mean, it will be pulled up off the ground slightly. But the thought was, these are materials that are easily sourced, can be executed well if done right. And we like the architecture of the building to sort of, shine with those materials. If you have materials you'd like to see used, I'm happy to,
Yeah, Bill, if I could ask you for the next time, because we won't be voting on this project this evening, if I could ask you for the next time we meet on this application, if you could show us some renderings of different materials that might be a little bit more traditional. I'm not talking about you don't need to build Trinity Church, but something that might fit a little closer in with the existing residential neighborhood that doesn't have to necessarily match. But I would like to. Part of my concern is this does stick out, right? I think some of the architecture sticks out in a good way, but some of it, in my opinion, doesn't necessarily. I would appreciate seeing just some alternatives that the board could review that might differ a little bit from what the UDC might have recommended. I know this board and that board don't always see eye to eye on some aspects of this process, and that's okay. I think it does make sense for us when we've heard concerns about some of the aesthetics of the building to take a look at perhaps some alternatives. And I'm sure you've got them in a slide deck somewhere. And if that's something that you can present to the board for our consideration, me as one member, I'd just like to see what some of the options are to see how we can help this building work a little bit better with the existing neighborhood while still respecting the fact that it's a new building and clearly better than what's there now.
Sure.
Okay. Those are my comments. Those are my questions. And I see Aaron's hand again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate just one maybe follow up on the materials. I think it would be interesting to see additional ones as well. I would actually be really curious if you had any photos of like physical photos of the material. I find sometimes in these drawings, the texture of things gets a little bit missed or hard to understand. So if we're going to be talking about materials, I, as one board member, would appreciate photos like with sunlight, to get the texture of those materials, if at all possible.
Absolutely. I can actually get some photos off other projects around the city that we've done with using these exact materials, so you can have a real life example you can go see in person. If I could just clarify one thing, just to make sure I'm understanding the request, we're not talking about necessarily revising the form of the building, more so the materials. Am I correct? Mike, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, in my opinion, that's right. I actually like the design of the building. I think the fans are interesting. I think it, I think it's modern without being too modern. I think it's. I actually really respected your answer about, or your comment about facing the windows away from the existing residences to give everybody a little extra privacy. So I have no problem as one member. On the design of the building. I just think the materials, I would like to see some alternatives.
Sure, can absolutely do that.
Anybody else? Yes, Debbie.
I just had a question on the parking, and apologies because it may be in the materials somewhere and I might have missed it, but I know you mentioned there's no ground floor commercial space. So the 5 spaces, is that intended for use by this neighboring commercial space? So I think you said it's not going to be tied to the condo units. Is that right?
I'll let it. I can't speak to that. I'm not sure if Attorney Vigorito can.
I apologize. I was just looking through the materials myself. No, I mean, they are not tied to any of the units.
So is it open for residents to use, or what's going to be, who's
Yeah.
going to be using the spaces? Is that how it is for sort of a first come, first serve, or?
Yes, yes. That would, that would be, I mean, unless something, over time, sometimes changes have to be made, but, that would be what the intended use is.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody else have any comments or questions of the applicant or of the staff at this point? Okay. Seeing none, I would welcome the applicant to come back in a few weeks with some of the additional renderings that the board has requested. I very much thank you for your application and your presentation tonight. The chair moves to continue this agenda item to September 8th, seconded by Aaron. Chair votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Aaron votes aye.
Debbie votes aye.
Okay, this agenda item is continued. There are no other agenda items that we will be taking up this evening. So with that being the case, I move to adjourn this meeting of the planning board, seconded by Debbie. Chair votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Debbie votes aye.
Aaron votes aye. I think I freezed out there for a
Yes.
minute.
We're adjourning. Great. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful night.
Night, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.